What happens when someone who's never touched a video game suddenly becomes the most overpowered player in existence? Meet Akira Yamamoto, a 26-year-old convenience store clerk whose biggest achievement was making it through college without failing a single exam. His life was predictable, boring, and absolutely ordinary until the day everything changed. One moment, he's restocking energy drinks at 3 in the morning, and the next, he's standing in a digital world where monsters are real and death is permanent. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. While every other player starts at level 1 with basic skills, Akira somehow spawned with creator privileges. We're talking about the kind of admin access that lets you rewrite reality itself. The Hunter Association had spent decades perfecting their ranking system. F-rank weaklings struggled against goblins. S-rank legends could take down dragons. Everyone knew their place in the hierarchy. Then Akira showed up and broke everything. The man who'd never held a sword in his life was suddenly crafting weapons that made legendary artifacts look like plastic toys. Players who'd spent years grinding for rare materials watched in horror as this nobody created entire dungeons from thin air. The established order crumbled faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Our story begins 3 months after the Great Integration, when virtual reality merged with the real world. Gates started appearing everywhere, spewing monsters into major cities. Governments collapsed. Corporations transformed into guilds overnight. The only people with any real power were the hunters, those lucky enough to survive their first encounter with the system and gain supernatural abilities. Everyone else became either prey or spectators. Akira was supposed to be prey. His stats were path rank standards, etic even by F strength of a wet noodle, agility of a 3-legged turtle, and magical power that couldn't light a birthday candle. The tutorial system took one look at his baseline abilities and practically apologized for wasting his time. But something glitched during his initialization. Instead of the standard newbie welcome package, Akira received administrative privileges that shouldn't have existed. The first sign something was wrong came during his mandatory skills assessment. Every new hunter gets tested to determine their class and starting equipment. Akira stepped into the evaluation chamber, expecting to fail spectacularly. The machine hummed, whirred, then started smoking. Error messages cascaded across every screen in the facility. When the smoke cleared, his status window displayed something that made seasoned veterans question reality itself. Class designation showed as creator, not crafter, not artificer, but creator with a capital C and enough system warnings to crash a server. His skill list read like someone had copy-pasted the entire game manual. Reality manipulation, matter generation, temporal adjustment, dimensional editing. The assessment officer stared at the readout like it was written in ancient hieroglyphs. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. Word spread through the hunter community faster than gossip at a high school reunion. Forums exploded with speculation. Was this some kind of hidden class that activated under specific conditions? Had someone found an exploit that bypassed normal restrictions? The top guilds started making offers before they'd even met him. Everyone wanted to recruit the mysterious creator-class hunter who'd appeared out of nowhere. Akira, meanwhile, was having an existential crisis in his tiny apartment. The system interface kept popping up with notifications he couldn't understand. Create new dungeon instance, modify monster spawn rates, generate legendary equipment. It was like being handed the controls to a nuclear reactor when all you wanted was to turn on a flashlight. Every menu led to a dozen more options, each more incomprehensible than the last. His first real test came when a C-rank gate opened near his neighborhood. The local Hunter Association was scrambling to assemble a raid team, but the monsters had already started pouring out. Akira found himself face to face with a pack of shadow wolves, creatures that had been known to wipe out entire squads of experienced fighters. Any rational person would have run. Instead, something clicked in his mind. The creator interface activated without him consciously triggering it. Time seemed to slow as options appeared in his vision. Modify enemy attributes, adjust environmental parameters, Generate protective barriers? Akira selected the first option that made sense and watched in amazement as the shadow wolves suddenly became docile as house pets. Their red eyes faded to brown, their snarls turned to friendly pants, and their razor-sharp claws retracted completely. The arriving hunter team found Akira sitting on a park bench, surrounded by a pack of wolves that were behaving like oversized dogs. One was even playing fetch with a stick he'd thrown. The team leader, a veteran A-rank named Captain Torres, demanded an explanation. How had a nobody F-rank turned apex predators into friendly companions without breaking a sweat? Akira tried to explain about the creator class and the strange interface, but nobody believed him. Creator classes were theoretical at best, the stuff of late-night forum debates and wishful thinking. No such thing existed in the official documentation. The Hunter Association's response was predictable. They classified the incident as anomalous and buried it under enough red tape to strangle a bureaucrat. But Akira wasn't done surprising people. His next encounter happened during what should have been a routine dungeon clear. The Crimson Caverns were a popular training ground for new hunters, filled with low-level monsters and basic treasure chests. Akira joined a pickup group led by an arrogant B-rank who treated him like disposable baggage from the moment they met. The team consisted of Marcus, the B-rank warrior, who clearly thought he was God's gift to dungeon crawling, Elena, the C-rank mage, who spent more time checking her appearance than watching for monsters, Jin, the C-rank rogue who complained about everything, and Sarah, the D-rank healer, who seemed genuinely nice but lacked confidence. They'd clearly done this dungeon dozens of times and expected another boring milk run. Everything went wrong the moment they stepped inside. Instead of the familiar red-walled corridors, they found themselves in a crystalline maze that sparkled with otherworldly light. The monsters weren't the usual fire sprites and magma slimes. These were creatures nobody recognized, elegant beings made of living gemstone that moved with predatory grace. Marcus immediately blamed Akira for somehow causing the change, as if an F-rank nobody could alter an established dungeon. The truth was more complicated. Akira's creator abilities had activated automatically when he entered, responding to his subconscious desire for something more interesting than another generic fire cave. The system had rewritten the entire instance without him realizing it. The Crystal Guardians they now faced weren't just stronger than the original monsters. They were smarter, more coordinated, and absolutely beautiful in their lethality. Each one stood 8 feet tall, with bodies that refracted light into rainbow patterns. Their attacks weren't just physically devastating, but created stunning visual displays that could hypnotize unwary opponents. Elena's fire magic, perfectly suited for the original dungeon, proved useless against creatures made of enchanted crystal. Jin's stealth abilities meant nothing when the walls themselves glowed with inner light. Sarah's healing spells barely kept pace with the damage they were taking. Only Marcus seemed capable of holding his own, but even his enhanced strength couldn't crack their opponent's mineral armor. That's when Akira decided to stop pretending he was helpless. The creator interface opened like a flower blooming in fast forward. Options cascaded through his vision faster than he could read them. Environmental controls, monster parameters, loot tables, difficulty scaling. Everything about this dungeon was suddenly under his direct command. With a thought, he could make the Crystal Guardians disappear entirely. Another thought could fill their inventories with legendary equipment. But that felt like cheating, and despite everything, Akira still thought of himself as basically honest. Instead, he decided to level the playing field in a more creative way. Akira accessed the dungeon's core parameters and made subtle adjustments. The Crystal Guardians kept their strength and beauty, but now they had clearly visible weak points that glowed with soft blue light. Their attack patterns became more predictable without being stupidly obvious. The maze walls developed handholds and ledges that skilled fighters could use for tactical advantages. Marcus noticed the changes immediately, but couldn't figure out what was happening. The monsters that had been impossible to damage suddenly had vulnerable spots he could target with precise strikes. Elena's spells started connecting when she aimed for the glowing joints between crystal segments. Jin found shadows he could hide in despite the ambient light. Sarah's confidence grew as her teammates stopped taking catastrophic damage every few seconds. What really broke everyone's brains was when Akira started casually editing their equipment mid-battle. Marcus's sword gained a crystal-cutting enchantment that made it sing when it struck true. Elena's staff began channeling her magic more efficiently, turning her modest fireballs into focused plasma beams. Jin's daggers developed the ability to find the exact weak points Akira had programmed into their enemies. Sarah's healing spells suddenly carried protective buffs that lingered for minutes instead of seconds. The team cleared the transformed dungeon in record time, walking away with loot that would normally require months of grinding to obtain. But instead of celebrating, they were all staring at Akira like he'd grown a second head. Nobody could explain what they'd witnessed. Equipment didn't just randomly upgrade itself during combat. Dungeons didn't restructure their layouts to accommodate specific fighting styles. The whole experience violated everything they knew about how the system worked. Marcus cornered Akira after they left the dungeon, demanding answers with the subtlety of a charging rhinoceros. How had an F-rank nobody turned their disaster into a triumph? What kind of hidden abilities was he concealing? Was he some kind of secret beta tester with administrative access? The questions kept coming until Akira finally snapped and told him the truth about his creator class. The revelation hit the team like a bucket of ice water. Creator classes were legend, myth, the kind of thing people made up to feel special on internet forums. But the evidence was impossible to ignore. Akira had rewritten reality around them with the casual ease of someone editing a text document. He'd turned a party wipe into a victory lap without breaking a sweat or raising his voice above conversational level. Elena was the first to recover from the shock, her mercenary instincts kicking in faster than her disbelief. A genuine creator-class hunter was worth more than entire kingdoms. The major guilds would start bidding wars that could reshape the global economy. Governments would offer citizenship, titles, blank checks, whatever it took to secure his loyalty. The smart play was to befriend him now before he realized his true value. Jin had a different perspective, one colored by years of watching powerful people crush anyone who threatened their position. Creator abilities were game-breaking in ways that would terrify established powers. The Hunter Association, the guild leaders, the corporate sponsors who funded everything, they'd all see Akira as either an asset to control or a threat to eliminate. There wouldn't be any middle ground. Sarah, sweet, naive Sarah, was just excited to have met someone who could make healing actually matter in high-level content. She'd spent months watching her teammates get one-shot by bosses, while her best spells tickled their health bars. The idea of running with someone who could adjust encounters to let support classes shine was like Christmas morning wrapped in birthday cake. But their celebration was cut short by an emergency alert made everyone's blood run cold. That disaster-rank gate had opened in downtown Tokyo, the kind of dimensional rift that could end civilization if left unchecked. The monsters pouring out weren't the usual collection of angry wildlife and generic fantasy creatures. These were void spawn, entities that existed to unmake reality itself wherever they touched. The Hunter Association was throwing everything they had at the incursion. S-rank legends who normally couldn't be bothered to leave their penthouse suites were gearing up for what might be their final battle. A-rank veterans were writing goodbye letters to their families. Even B-rank hunters like Marcus were being conscripted into what everyone expected to be a meat grinder operation. Akira watched the emergency broadcasts with growing horror as the situation deteriorated in real time. Military forces were engaging the void spawn with conventional weapons that passed through their targets like they were made of smoke. Hunter teams that had seemed invincible were being erased from existence, not killed, but simply deleted from reality, as if they'd never been born. The death toll was climbing all previous past disaster records. Entire city blocks were vanishing into patches of absolute nothingness where the void spawn had passed. Evacuation efforts were failing as faster-moving entities outflanked every defensive line the authorities tried to establish. At the current rate of expansion, Tokyo would be completely consumed within 6 hours. That's when the Hunter Association did something unprecedented. They issued a global emergency conscription order that activated every licensed hunter, regardless of rank or experience. F-rank nobodies who'd never seen real combat were being handed weapons and told to buy time for the evacuation efforts. It was a suicide mission disguised as patriotic duty, but nobody had any better ideas. Akira felt the conscription notice arrive on his phone with the subtle impact of a sledgehammer to the skull. Report to Staging Area 7 within 2 hours, or face criminal prosecution for dereliction of duty. Bring any equipment rated for disaster-level threats. Prepare for extended combat operations with minimal support. The fine print basically said goodbye to your loved ones and update your will. Marcus was already suiting up when Akira found him, strapping on armor that had seen too many battles and checking weapons that might not survive another serious fight. The big warrior's bravado had evaporated completely. He knew what disaster rank meant. Everyone did. It meant death was coming for them all, and the only question was whether they'd buy enough time for others to escape. Elena was practicing her most powerful spells in the guild courtyard, pushing her mana reserves to their absolute limits. Jin was sharpening his daggers with the mechanical precision of someone trying not to think about tomorrow. Sarah was crying quietly while organizing her medical supplies, knowing she'd probably watch all her friends die before the void claimed her too. But Akira was thinking about something entirely different. His creator interface was humming with possibilities he'd never explored. What if disaster rank didn't have to mean hopeless? What if someone with administrative privileges could rewrite the rules that made void spawn so unstoppable? The system treated them as invincible because that's how they'd been programmed, but programs could be edited. The more he considered it, the more feasible it seemed. Void spawn weren't truly from outside reality. They were system entities with specific parameters and behavior patterns. Their immunity to conventional attacks was just another variable in their code. Their ability to erase other entities was a special effect, not some fundamental law of physics. Everything could be modified if you had the right access level. Akira opened his creator interface and started exploring options he'd been afraid to touch before. Deep system access, entity modification protocols, reality stability controls. The warnings were extensive and terrifying, but the void spawn were already rewriting reality in their own image. What was the worst that could happen if he tried to stop them? The interface that opened before Takeshi Nakamura was unlike anything he'd seen during his previous experiments. This wasn't the friendly user dashboard he'd grown accustomed to. This was raw system architecture, the digital equivalent of looking directly into the sun. Lines of code scrolled past faster than human eyes could follow. Warning messages flashed in colors that didn't have names. Error notifications piled up like digital snow in a blizzard of ones and zeros. But buried within that chaos, Takeshi found what he was looking for. The void spawn weren't coded as unstoppable forces of nature. They were entities with parameters, just like everything else in the system. Damage immunity wasn't a fundamental property, but a status effect that could be modified. Their reality deletion ability was triggered by specific conditions that could potentially be altered or removed entirely. The problem was scope. Editing a single monster in a controlled dungeon environment was child's play compared to rewriting entities that were actively destroying downtown Tokyo. The processing power required would be astronomical. The risk of catastrophic system failure was so high that even attempting it could crash reality itself. But watching the live feeds of void spawn consuming entire buildings made the choice obvious. Takeshi started small, targeting a single entity that appeared on the emergency broadcast feeds. The creature looked like liquid shadow given form and malice, flowing through a shopping district, while everything it touched simply ceased to exist. Storefronts, streetlights, abandoned cars, all vanishing into patches of absolute nothingness that hurt to look at directly. Through his interface, Takeshi could see the entity's core programming. Void status active, reality manipulation enabled, damage threshold set to infinite. With surgical precision, he began making adjustments. Void status changed to normal. Reality manipulation reduced to environmental only. Damage threshold lowered to manageable levels while maintaining the creature's imposing presence. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The void spawn stumbled as if someone had just turned off its cheat codes. A hunter team that had been retreating in terror suddenly found their attacks actually connecting. Bullets that should have passed harmlessly through dark matter were now punching visible holes in the creature's form. Magic spells that had been useless were suddenly dealing meaningful damage. The monster was still dangerous, still deadly, but it was no longer an unstoppable force of extinction. Within minutes, the combined hunter team had brought it down through coordinated assault tactics that actually worked for once. Their cheers of victory echoed through the emergency communication channels, the first good news anyone had heard since the crisis began. But one modified void spawn wasn't going to save Tokyo. Dozens more were still wreaking havoc throughout the city, and Takeshi's single edit had already pushed his mental resources to their limits. The creator interface wasn't designed for mass modifications. Each change required individual attention, surgical precision, and enough concentration to give him a splitting headache. That's when inspiration struck like lightning in a clear sky. Instead of editing each monster individually, what if he could modify the underlying template they were all based on? Every entity in the system was generated from basic patterns that determined their appearance, abilities, and behavior. If he could access and alter the void spawn template itself, every existing creature would inherit those changes automatically. The template editing interface made his previous adventures in system modification look like finger painting compared to brain surgery. This was core architecture, the foundational code that determined how reality functioned at its most basic level. Warning messages covered every available surface, each one more dire than the last. Unauthorized template modification could result in system-wide instability, dimensional collapse, or complete reality failure. Takeshi ignored them all and dove deeper into the code than any creator-class user was ever meant to go. The Void Spawn template was a masterpiece of malicious programming, designed to be as destructive and unstoppable as possible. But like everything else in the system, it could be edited by someone with sufficient access privileges and absolutely no sense of self-preservation. He worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon performing open-heart surgery while the building burned down around him. Void immunity became damage resistance. Reality deletion became reality disruption. Infinite health became merely astronomical health. Each change required careful consideration to maintain game balance while making the creatures actually beatable by mortal hunters. The moment he applied the template changes, every void spawn in Tokyo simultaneously staggered as their godlike powers were suddenly downgraded to merely terrifying. Hunter teams that had been running for their lives found themselves in actual fights instead of hopeless routs. Military forces discovered their weapons could now inflict meaningful damage. The tide of battle didn't turn immediately, but it stopped being a complete massacre. Emergency broadcasts started reporting successful engagements across the city. A B-rank team had just taken down a void spawn using conventional tactics. An A-rank solo hunter was holding his ground against two of the creatures simultaneously. Even the military was scoring kills with coordinated artillery strikes that actually connected with their targets. But Takeshi's modifications came with an unexpected side effect that he only discovered when the system started sending him experience notifications. Every void spawn killed by other hunters was crediting him with partial experience points, not because he'd participated in the fights, but because his template modifications were classified as contributory assistance to every successful engagement. The experience gain was astronomical. Each void spawn was worth thousands of points, even before the system applied various multipliers for difficulty, cooperation, and crisis response. Within an hour, Takeshi had gained more levels than most hunters achieved in their entire careers. His stats were climbing so rapidly that the interface could barely keep up with the changes. Level 50, level 70, level 95. The numbers kept rising as void spawn fell across Tokyo, each death feeding back to the person who'd made victory possible. But the experience wasn't the only thing changing. His creator abilities were evolving, expanding, gaining new functions that hadn't existed before. Template editing was just the beginning. At level 100, something fundamental shifted in his relationship with the system. New interface options appeared that made his previous capabilities look like children's toys. Reality Architect, Dimensional Editor, Universal Administrator. He could now modify not just individual entities or templates, but entire worlds, complete dimensional spaces, the very laws that governed how magic and physics interacted. The Hunter Association's Emergency Command Center was buzzing with confused activity as reports flooded in from across the disaster zone. Void spawn were dying, not just being delayed or temporarily contained, but actually defeated permanently. Hunter teams that should have been wiped out within minutes were instead calling in successful kills and requesting new assignments. Director Yamada stared at the tactical display with the expression of a man watching his fundamental understanding of reality crumble in real time. Disaster rank entities didn't just become manageable overnight. The void spawn had been classified as extinction-level threats precisely because conventional tactics were useless against them. Yet somehow, those same tactics were now producing consistent results. The first theory was equipment failure. Maybe the monsters had been misclassified due to faulty sensors or communication errors. But video footage from the field told a different story. These were definitely void spawn, complete with their characteristic reality warping abilities. They were just somehow vulnerable to attacks that should have been completely ineffective. The second theory was even more disturbing. Someone with unprecedented system access was actively modifying the crisis in real time. The kind of administrative privileges required for such large-scale changes didn't officially exist. But the evidence was impossible to ignore. Reality was being edited by an unknown actor with godlike power and apparently heroic intentions. Yamada's secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from the Prime Minister's office. The conversation was brief, tense, and conducted entirely in euphemisms that fooled nobody. Find whoever was responsible for the changes, determine their loyalty to the state, secure their cooperation through whatever means necessary. The national security implications were too significant to ignore. But Takeshi was already 3 steps ahead of any government response. His enhanced creator abilities included surveillance detection protocols that alerted him to any attempts at tracking or monitoring. He could see the Hunter Association's investigation starting to focus on his general location. Military satellites were being reposited to provide coverage of his neighborhood. Electronic surveillance equipment was being deployed in ever-tightening circles around his apartment. The smart play would have been to disappear immediately, use his reality editing powers to create a new identity and vanish into anonymity. But Takeshi found himself reluctant to abandon his ordinary life just because he'd accidentally become the most powerful person on Earth. His convenience store job might be boring, but it was his boring job. His tiny apartment might be cramped, but it was home. Besides, running would only confirm their suspicions and make him look guilty of whatever crimes they decided to invent. Better to maintain the illusion of normalcy while keeping his abilities secret. He could always escape later if the situation became untenable. For now, he'd continue being Takeshi Nakamura, mild-mannered convenience store clerk who definitely wasn't responsible for saving Tokyo from interdimensional annihilation. The final void spawn fell just as the sun was setting over the partially restored city. The creature had been cornered in Shibuya Station by a combined force of S-rank hunters and military units working in unprecedented coordination. What should have been a desperate last stand became instead a methodical execution, as conventional tactics finally proved effective against unconventional threats. Takeshi watched the live coverage from his apartment couch, sharing takeout ramen with his cat and pretending his heart wasn't racing every time the camera showed another successful attack. The experience notifications had finally stopped flooding his interface, leaving him at level 112 with abilities that probably violated several laws of physics. The aftermath was predictably chaotic. Government officials were claiming credit for revolutionary new anti-void tactics. Military leaders were praising their troops' adaptability under impossible circumstances. Hunter Association executives were talking about paradigm shifts in crisis response methodology. Everyone had theories about what had changed, but nobody had answers. The only person who knew the truth was sitting in a 15-square-meter apartment, eating convenience store noodles and wondering what he was supposed to do with enough power to reshape reality itself. The system interface was still offering him options that could fundamentally alter how the world worked. He could eliminate all monsters permanently, grant everyone superhuman abilities, or rewrite the laws of physics to be more convenient. But every option came with consequences he couldn't predict or control. Power without wisdom was just another form of destruction. Takeshi had seen enough chaos for one day. Maybe tomorrow he'd figure out how to use his abilities responsibly. Tonight, he just wanted to finish his ramen and pretend he was still normal. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The contents made his blood run cold, despite their polite wording. The Hunter Association would like to invite him for a voluntary interview regarding recent events in Tokyo. His cooperation would be greatly appreciated. A car would arrive at his building in 30 minutes. Takeshi looked at his cat, who was pointedly ignoring the dramatic tension in favor of grooming himself with single-minded determination. Even his pet had better priorities than saving the world. Maybe there was wisdom in that approach. Deal with immediate problems first, worry about cosmic responsibility later. The interview invitation wasn't really optional, and running would only make things worse. But Takeshi had advantages they couldn't imagine. His creator interface included social manipulation protocols that could make him appear completely harmless and forgettable. Memory modification wasn't technically possible, but perception adjustment certainly was. He could walk into their interrogation room as the most powerful being on Earth and walk out as a confused convenience store clerk who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The question was whether that level of deception was worth maintaining his secret identity, or if honesty might actually serve his interests better. After all, they needed him more than he needed them. Tokyo was safe for now, but other disaster-rank gates could open at any time. The Void Spawn template could be modified again by whoever had created it originally. His creator abilities might be the only thing standing between humanity and extinction-level threats that conventional forces couldn't handle. The car arrived exactly on schedule, a black sedan with tinted windows and diplomatic plates that screamed government conspiracy. Takeshi grabbed his jacket and headed downstairs, leaving his cat in charge of the apartment and his creator interface on standby. Whatever came next, he'd face it as himself, rather than hiding behind digital camouflage. The driver was polite, professional, and completely silent during the 20-minute ride to an unmarked building in a government district Takeshi had never visited. The facility looked like every other bureaucratic office from the outside, but the security checkpoints and armed guards suggested this wasn't a place that handled routine paperwork. Director Yamada was waiting in a conference room that managed to be both austere and intimidating, despite its generic office furniture and motivational posters. The man looked exactly like Takeshi had expected, based on his television appearances. Middle-aged, competent, and completely out of his depth when dealing with reality-altering anomalies. The interview started with standard questions about his whereabouts during the crisis, his hunter registration status, and his knowledge of system mechanics. Takeshi answered honestly where possible and vaguely where necessary, maintaining the persona of a confused civilian who'd been caught up in events beyond his understanding. But Yamada wasn't fooled by the innocent act. His questions grew more specific, more targeted, more focused on abilities that officially didn't exist. Had Takeshi ever experienced system glitches or unusual interface behaviors? Did he possess any undocumented skills or classes? Had he ever successfully modified entity parameters or environmental conditions? The final question hit like a punch to the gut, despite its casual delivery. Did he know anything about creator class designations or administrative system access? The way Yamada asked made it clear this wasn't fishing expedition. They knew something specific, and they were giving him a chance to volunteer information before they revealed how much they'd already discovered. And that's where Takeshi's story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. The convenience store clerk, who accidentally became a god, now sits across from government officials who want to control power they can't even comprehend. But here's the beautiful irony. They think they're interrogating a potential asset when they're actually negotiating with someone who could delete their entire organization with a thought. The hunter meta didn't just break when Takeshi gained creator abilities. It completely shattered, rebuilt itself, then exploded again for good measure. What happens next will determine whether humanity gets a guardian angel or a very bored deity who just wants to stock shelves in peace.